In today's lecture, I'm going to teach you how to draw the human eye. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you how the human eye works. So up to this point, we've drawn some eyes, except we still haven't really gone in depth with how the human eye works and what we're drawing. So first off, we're going to create a diagram of the human eyeball, and then we're going to layer on the human eyelid. So first off, we have the eyeball. So this circle I have drawn here is the sphere that makes up my eyeball. Next, what we have is what's called the iris. The iris is the colored part of the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle in, like so. And that's going to make up my iris. The next part of the eye is the pupil. So the pupil is a hole in the eye. Now, the reason why there's a hole in your eye is because this is where the light comes in and hits the back of your eyeball and basically tells your brain what to see. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but if you're not, that's why I want to go over it. Now, the iris is a muscle. The iris opens and closes the pupil, and the pupil can get bigger or smaller. So the larger the pupil, the more light it's going to be letting in, and the smaller the pupil, the less light it's going to be letting in. Now, pupils can be all different types of colors, irises can be all different types of colors. They can be anywhere from green to blue to brown, sometimes gray. They can have little hints of gold in there. There's all different types of irises. This other part of the eyeball is called the white of the eyeball. Another thing to understand is that the iris is generally flat on the eyeball and sometimes even indented. And so that might cause a little bit of a shadow on this top side. If the light is coming down from the top, it's going to cause a little bit of shadow on this top side because it's indented. So if we have a look at our eyeball from a side view, what we'd see is we'd see a bowl, but the front of it would be cut flat like so. And that could possibly be barely indenting in. And then we have the hole for our pupil, which then comes into our eyeball. And that's why the pupil appears to be black, is because you're looking into basically a cave and no light is going into that cave, at least hardly any light at all. The only light that's coming in is being focused by the lens in front of your eye, so it's hitting a small spot in the back of your eye. So now that we have our eyeball drawn, the next thing we need to add is the eyelids. So the eyelids are basically just pieces of skin that are laid across the top of our eyeball. And then it comes up like so, and we don't have the top of the eyelid all the way back here where the round part of the ball is. We have it about halfway in. So that would be the top of our eyelid like so. And then we have the bottom eyelid. So the bottom eyelid can come around like so. So you have to imagine like the skin is wrapping around the ball when you're drawing your eyelids. And then you're going to have a little bit of a bottom eyelid. You don't have to make it this prominent, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to draw that in really strong. Another thing to note is the top eyelid will overlap the bottom eyelid right over here. Then we have what's called the tear duct. So this area right here, that's the tear duct, and that's where your tears come from. All right, now let's go over a couple of different eye shapes, because a lot of the times people will teach you how to draw eyes, but it's a very generic type of eye, and there are actually lots of different eye shapes, and it's what makes somebody look like themselves is that their eye is shaped the way it is. So the first type of eye shape we're going to go over is called the almond eye shape. So the almond eye shape is basically shaped like an almond. So if we add in the tear duct, then the eye part of it is just going to be basically shaped like so. Very much like an almond. And then we can go ahead and draw in our iris and our pupil. And then we can add in our eyelid. A lot of the time, the eyelid on the bottom is just going to be shadow, and there's not really going to be a hard line like there is on the top. So there's our almond-shaped eye. Another type of eye shape is the round eye. So the round eye is going to be very similar to the almond shape, except the bottom part of it is going to be different. So we come over like so, just like we did with our almond-shaped eye. But rather than just coming down like this and making an almond shape, it's actually going to swoop down a bit more. So it's going to start off like the almond shape, but then it's going to come down a little bit more like so. And then we're going to go ahead and add in our iris and then our pupil. Then we can add in our tear duct. And then we're going to go ahead and add in the eyelid. Great. And we might add a little bit of this ledge of the eyelid also. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and move on to the eye. That's called the hooded eye. Now, the hooded eye is basically can be like the rounded eye or the almond eye. It doesn't really matter. The hooded eye is just what happens with the brow. So, for example, if we go ahead and draw an almond-shaped eye, like so, and then we can go ahead and draw the iris and the pupil. And now, before we draw in that eyelid on the top, what we want to do is we want to shape the brow. And rather than the brow being way up here, it actually sags down over the eye. And so you don't get to see very much of that top eyelid. So it's going to start right about down here, and then it's going to sag over the eye like so. And then we're going to come all the way over and around, and then we can go ahead and add the eyelid on these edges where we can barely see it. And we can also add a little bit of shadow in underneath there, like so. And we can add this bottom eyelid in. I'm going to enlarge my iris just a little bit, add a bottom eyelid to that ledge. All right, perfect. So that's called the hooded eye. It's just where the top of the brow hangs down and sags over the eyelid. Next, let's go over what's called the upturned eye. So the upturned eye is very often used when Disney animators are creating girl characters. And what it is it's basically just the eye at a slanted angle. So some people actually do have this type of eye. So it's going to come up like so, and then it's going to come down like so. But you'll see it's kind of similar to the almond eye. The only difference is that rather than the line going straight through it horizontally, now it's going through at a vertical line. So now we can go ahead and add in our pupil. We can add in our iris and then our pupil. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and add in our eyelid on the top. And we can add in our eyelid on the bottom. Now, the last one I want to go over is called the monolid eye. So it's going to be very similar to the almond eye and the upturned eye. It's sort of a mix between the two. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, we start off with more of an up line like this, like we did with our almond eye. But then that kind of turns more into our upturned eye. So it comes over like so. And then we're going to come down like this. We'll add our tear duct in. So you'll see the first half of it is very much like our almond eye, but the back half of it is very much like our upturned eye. Then we can go ahead and add in our iris and our pupil. And with this type of eye, the eyelid actually hangs right down over like so, and you don't actually really see any of that eyelid line. All right, great. Now let's go over how to create different expressions with eyes. So first off, let's talk about the placement of the iris. So the iris is a big part in telling your viewer how the person or the character is feeling. So if we go ahead and draw an eye right here, and we put our iris right here in the middle, and we have it covered just a little bit by the top eyelid and not really at all by the bottom eyelid, the character is going to look very neutral. If we have it come down even covered a little bit by the bottom eyelid, it'll still look pretty neutral. As long as the top and the bottom of the iris are covered, your character will look pretty neutral and it won't look very surprised or anything like that. But let's say we want our character to look surprised or scared. Well, what we can do is we can lift the top eyelid a little bit higher, but the main thing that you want to do to make them look scared or surprised is you need to show the white of the eye or the top part of the iris with your eyelid. So we're going to bring our iris down like so we can see a little bit of that top area. And we can go ahead and add in our pupil. But now our eye looks scared or even excited. Now, what if you wanted your eye to look really tired and droopy? Well, basically what you would do is you would go ahead and drop this eyelid much more past the top of your iris. So let's go ahead and draw that in. So it would come in sort of like so, and then we'd see a lot more of the actual eyelid itself. Then we can go ahead and draw on the bottom eyelid. And then we can go ahead and draw on the iris, and the top half of it is going to be covered. But that gives us the illusion that our person is very tired or exhausted. We can also draw sort of some lines underneath here to exaggerate the wrinkles underneath the eye. Now, we can also change the expression of the eye with the eyebrows. So, for example, with this eye right here, if I want to go ahead and add in an eyebrow, and I really put it towards a down angle and really close to my eye here, and I'll even have some of my brow coming down over my eyelid, like so. And I'll go ahead and finish adding that eye in. I'll add in the hairs. Well, now that eye looks really angry. With this eye over here, we can go ahead and make it look even more surprised by adding a very uplifted eye. So we're going to bring the eyebrow really high. And this might be a little exaggerated, but that's okay. There's a very famous artist named Norman Rockwell, and he was very famous for exaggerating how high up his character's eyebrows went, and that made his paintings look much better is because of that exaggeration. So now we can go ahead and add in the hair on that eyebrow. We can also show a lot more of the eyelid because it's being stretched out as it's lifted. And then with this eye right here, we can go ahead and make that look much more docile if we just add in a straight eyebrow. Just like so. And then we can go ahead and add in the hair on that eyebrow. Alright, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned how the eyeball works. So first off, we have the eyeball itself, which is also known as the white of the eye. Then we have the iris, which is the colored muscle of the eye, which pulls open the pupil. And the pupil, as we saw here in this side diagram, is just a hole in the eyeball, and it lets light into the actual inside or the cavernous part of the eyeball so that your eye can pick up the signal and send it to your brain. So really that black there is just a hole. Then we learned how to add in our eyelids and how it's basically just skin wrapped around the ball itself. Then we learned that we need to add a tear duct in there. And then after we learned how the eyeball works, we learned how there are different shapes of eyes. Then we learned how to create different expressions with our eyes by how much of the iris we show and the shape of the eyelid. We also learned that by shaping and positioning our eyebrows in the correct positions can create different expressions also. I really hope you learned something from this lecture, and I'm really excited to see you in the next one where we're going to learn how to draw the nose.